Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Wired for Wonder. Today, we are joined by Mark Rigney, who is the Chief Revenue Officer of Equitus.ai. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Lori. It's so nice to be here. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, well, in this show, we are looking at the big question of how do we use AI, the acceleration that AI is bringing, to better serve humanity in the workplace. And so, as we think about that, Mark, you want to give us just like a real brief overview of kind of who you are in the workplace today?
Yeah, so it's really multifaceted, but in the workplace, more specifically to your question, a company leader responsible for all aspects of revenue, sales, marketing, go-to-market opportunities, and those sorts of things. Obviously, that's a key element for us as an AI software company. So it's really fun for me to be able to integrate across the board. My background is in technology. Undergraduate and graduate work in computer science with emphasis in my master's work of artificial neural systems. So that's a lot of fun. It kind of fits actually in the work that we're doing.
Yeah.
But I grew up on a farm. I grew up in rural Tennessee and learned a lot of lessons from that. Hard work, obviously, grit, determination, and how to take care of your customers. In that case, my customers were dairy cattle. So it was a 24/7 thing, twice a day, every day. So a lot of good lessons, but that's sort of where I'm at in the company today.
All right. So you, like me, have had a couple of decades here in the technology space, and now we're facing AI. And it, 6 months ago it was kind of the changes that are coming, but now it's the changes that are here
Yes, ma'am.
in the workplace. So if I were to ask you, what is one of the biggest challenges you're seeing, or thinking about helping other leaders? Like, what's something that you think is really important for leaders in the workplace to be considering when they're thinking about, right, the future of tech, the future of leadership, and what we're going to do as humans?
Yeah, wow, Lori, that's a great question, and there's so much bottled up into that. So let me just kind of give you some fundamentals of what I think is critical for leaders, es- always, but especially with the advent of change that we're seeing so much and so quickly with AI. I think leaders today have to go back and really sharpen the sword in their own areas, personally and professionally, of what's morally, ethically, and relationally the foundations for them. Because if you aren't in touch, if you don't know what those boundaries are, not just for yourself personally, but for your business, if you don't have those guidelines or guardrails, you're going to drift into territory, or you're going to allow yourself to be pulled into territory with the advent of technology changes, with policy changes, with employee changes, if you will, that are really going to test those boundaries. So I think it's important to really have solid foundations in those three areas.
Okay, so I love that, but I'm just going to throw this out there. But wait a minute, in the workplace, we have definitely not considered relational. We have not considered the leader is needing to change too. It feels like up until this point, at least the last 20, 30 years, right? It's really been about not hierarchical, but it's been about you do what you're told type of
Yeah,
thing. Like, not necessarily micromanagement, but hey, just follow this very predictable
yeah.
timeline. But what you're talking about is some of the softer skill, like leaders looking internally at themselves. Um, how what do you recommend, or how do you see that as different than where we were even 5 years ago?
I see that different because 5 years ago, we didn't have technology necessarily challenging those barriers for us. But with AI and the capabilities that it brings, whether they are right, wrong, good, or bad, they are going to challenge each leader in those particular areas. There are going to be challenges of autonomous work and independence, and that's a relational side of that. There are moral and ethical boundaries that you can see in the law profession daily, legal profession, and in other areas of technology and work, where those boundaries are starting to be encroached upon and pressed. And it's going to challenge leaders. And I think it's so critical for leaders to understand that and have a really good grasp there, so they can be an example for each of their employees and help them navigate and establish those firm boundaries for themselves as well.
So if I'm hearing you right, you're saying there's the shift in leadership is that you have to also look at yourself internally. It's no longer about what you know or the processes you've had, because AI is democratizing all information. So what you think was once your secret sauce is like, if it's just information, that is out there. But what I hear you saying is like, hey, there is this opportunity, and this is what we see at deephumanx too, is there's this opportunity for leadership to take a breath and say, hey, let's actually look inward so we can create some change in ourselves to allow other people around us, that relational change, to have that freedom to make changes as well. Is that
Yeah, Lori, I
wrong?
think that's spot on. It really is, and I'm glad you pointed out the fact about change because I mean, look, life is about change. Work is about change. If you don't believe me, go back and look at your high school yearbook. You know,
I had great bangs then. I'm just going to say it.
life is about change. So I think we have to always be ready to embrace change where it's appropriate and reject change when it's not appropriate. And the ability to discern between what's appropriate and what's not has to be rooted in those moral and ethical and relational aspects. So it gets back to those fundamentals for me. You
hmm
really have to know what those boundaries and those baselines are to be able to build on.
I love that. And so we actually see that at deephumanx. We work a lot on helping people ride the wave of change because we're realists and we're like, hey, nobody knows exactly where this is going. It's much more important for you to get comfortable with change
Right.
in a world that we have tried to create pure predictability.
Yeah.
Did we ever get predictability? Not really,
Yeah.
but it makes us feel like in the workplace, like we have it. And so we actually, and I personally believe that you do need to anchor in whatever your values are, right?
Right.
And it's those
Right.
values that as humanity, we're going to
Yeah.
be, that's going to show up to figure out where we go in the future. And at deephumanx, we actually have the X in there because we think that every one of us is each one of us are motivated by our own internal X factor, right?
Right.
Something that is of value to me. And if I'm
Mhm.
very clear on it, it makes it very easy for me to see, or you to decide, hey, I want to play with her or I don't, right? Like I
Yeah.
want to, like
Yeah.
this is something I want to engage in or not.
Right.
If I was to ask you, what's your X factor? What do you think is that really driving force that since you were a kid, is still in you and has kind of always been in you?
Wow. Um, that's a great question. I think always trying to do the right thing, probably for me, has been that X factor. And doing the right thing is rooted for me in what's best for each party in an engagement because it's like a negotiation. If you enter into a negotiation seeking to get the best deal you can without regard for the other person, then you're most likely going to have an imbalanced outcome of that negotiation. And I can tell you from experience, an imbalanced outcome rarely is a good thing, whether it's more heavily weighted in your favor or heavily weighted in your other person's favor or the other company's favor. Rarely does that succeed in the long term. So seeking to have the right thing done in terms of balance is really, for me, that's, I think since I've been a kid, that's really always been what's the right thing to do, and look at it, even though it may not be what I really want, what is the right outcome? What's the right thing to do? What's best?
Do you think that's led you to maybe pause and look at the bigger picture more often than just running towards a short-term solution by doing that?
Oh,
Like, do you?
clearly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it clearly has. Excuse me. And it really hinges on one of the things you spoke on just a moment ago, where you talked about rooting in those values, being rooted in whatever those values are, because you mentioned riding that wave of change. You know, when you get, if you've ever whitewater rafted, okay,
Oh,
uh,
yep.
then one of the things you want to really be rooted on is an edge or a rope or a cord or something in that raft so that you don't wind up in the water, right?
Hmm?
And that's that anchor that you're looking for, because there are going to be so many different ups and downs and turns and rapids and calm and all of the different scenarios. If in that storm of change, if you know what those values are and you are clear with those and those are clear to you, then those waves of change aren't going to be so disruptive.
Oh
They're
my God. I like love this analogy because I feel like water is such a good representation for like humanity,
yeah,
right? Like it's so funny how right, there's times where you have to be very rigid and hold on tight. And then there's times where you get to sit back and,
yeah,
if you're on a float, you get to sit and look at the
yeah,
trees blowing in the wind, the sun
yeah,
shining, listen to the birds.
right.
But somehow I feel like we've messed it up a little bit in the workplace where
Mm,
we've gone to almost treating to avoid anyone falling off the raft in the heavy rapids, right? We've forgotten to lay off that we don't have to be in like this tight, secure, rigid um stance all the time, to the point where we've put in so many processes and standardizations, which we need,
yeah,
but to the point of it's like we've asked everybody to be on their rigid stance all the time, and it starts to feel wearing
yeah,
on individuals within teams.
yeah,
And so to go back to the rooting of what you and I are talking about, right? That anchoring is like, hey, if you have something that you're anchored in, you can all of a sudden say, okay, I get that standardization is process is there, but I don't have to spend my off hours thinking about
yeah,
this problem at work, because I can actually see like, we're actually just floating, and
yeah,
I'm already watching out for rapids ahead. So
yeah,
I don't have to be so gosh darn rigid or panicky all the time. Does that
yeah.
relate at all to you, or is that too hypothetical, like
Oh,
too, okay.
yeah. Relates perfectly. Isn't there freedom in that? Uh, I mean, there really is freedom in knowing what those values and those where your foundation is, and regardless of what the change comes along, you always have to create space for other people, and for their because their boundaries may not be exactly what yours are, but that opens a door of opportunity for conversation, right?
Right? To be like, hey, do I want to take a right here or a left?
Yeah,
And I actually agree with you. I think it opens up like micro moments of choice, right? There is a
yeah,
freedom. Like, we can feel a lot of disconnect in the world right now, right?
yeah,
There's a lot of polarity. There's a lot of
mhm,
just things that aren't working. And part of that is because some of the systems we have in place are just very, very rigid. Whereas when you do anchor in what's important to you, you get this freedom, like you said, of not, of being like, that can still happen. And there's a scenario where I can still get my own needs met as well, right?
sure,
It's like almost taking it from a micro view to a macro view, right? To say,
right.
look, this can happen, and I don't have to play in that suffering. I can actually let that happen, and I can still continue to float down. Uh,
Exactly.
Man, you are like getting into like what I find the juicy part, but of being a human is, right, is we are all changing anyways. Right. To go back to the river is I can't think of who it was. There's a big philosopher who said man is never the same. You are not the same when you step your foot into a river and pull it out, because the next time you step your foot, even if it's in the same place, the river has changed, the circumstances has changed. But the only thing you can root in is what have you learned from your past
That's
experience?
right. That's right. That's exactly right. And taking that opportunity to learn is really amplified when you take opportunity to have that conversation with others, to engage in that. And if you really seek to understand where they're coming from, that's really when we have opportunity to learn. Because so many times we want to be myopic about things, and we think it's really all about us, and this is mine, and this is where I'm at, and I really can't get outside my box. I'm not comfortable with it. But if you really let that go for a moment, and you really look someone in the eyes, and you listen, and you really try to understand where they're coming from and their perspective, it can really help. Uh, you learn. It helps me learn. I mean, so much. And as a leader, I think that is critical. I think it's so critical.
All right. Well, so now you're in my head. In my head, I'm thinking immediately of like perfection versus knowing everything
Mm.
versus being confident in when to say I don't know and letting the team take it. You got any advice for leaders who are right in the midst of change, who are worried about, yeah, we all want to do good, because even if the world isn't all about us, my world's pretty much about me. But like there's ways and there's like techniques to be able to still have it about me and give space for other people. What would you give advice to leaders who are facing like some big changes around how do you let go maybe of some of your own perfections to actually get to the place where you can let others contribute and teach you?
Wow. That's that is such a great question, and there's so many thoughts in my head, and I want to use an analogy in one part of it to kind of talk about that. But I think number one, we have to recognize that we can't be full of ourselves. Okay, that's first. We have to recognize that humility has to be a heavier dose in our life than probably sometimes people want. We have to have a great dose of humility about us. We have to recognize that we don't always have the answers. We can be confident, however. We can be confident knowing what we do know, but we can be confident without arrogance. Okay. We can have confidence without arrogance. And I think that's really, really important, because when you have confidence without being arrogant, it exudes a leadership element that really empowers other people to want to follow you and want to be part of your team. But the moment you let that arrogance get in there, and that comes with thinking I'm always right. Okay, that's where the arrogance part comes from. So now let me bring my analogy into this for just a moment. Um, uh, Part of my past career, I worked with Rawlings Sporting Goods, and yeah, and I was responsible for all of our product development, intellectual property, new products, etc. My team was, and if you think about a major league baseball player, that has a really great batting average, it's maybe, I mean, some of the best batting averages are 350, right? So that says 35% of the time they make the right decision, right? They make the decision right enough to score, to get ahead.
Yeah.
Well, if I'm a leader and I think I make more decisions than 35% of the time, the right decisions, they can all be in the right direction, maybe, but they may not always be the home run. Then I think I'm probably thinking a little bit more of myself than I should if I think that I have a really, really high percentage of getting it right all the time. So I think we just have to have a self awareness that we're not going to get it right all the time. And we need to understand and let our teams know that we don't expect them to be right all the time. I like to think progress over perfection,
Mm.
you know?
I like that. Now that kind of to me, I'm hearing like my ego is like, what do you mean I have to drop some of my own self-belief? That's what's gotten me to where I am today.
Yeah.
But what kind of freedoms or what kind of feelings do you get when you actually kind of drop some of that ego and let that humility, just be in front of you? Like, what do you think are some of the outcomes of leaders doing that, right? Of like being just like totally honest, like I got a good track record, but I'm not right all the time.
I think one of the biggest outcomes from that is respect.
Mm.
I think other people, especially your employees and your peers, I think they respect that genuine honesty. You know, they see that. I mean, they see, whether you're right all the time or not. And everyone that we're around can they know the truth, whether we are willing to
Right.
admit it or not.
They know what's going on in my head.
Yeah, well, they can see the result of what you're doing and your actions and those sorts of things, and they don't have to be told. But it's when we try to tell, but if we can back up from that and just be transparent and just be vulnerable, like you said, then people start to recognize that, hey, he's a person too, or she's a person too, and they recognize that, and they're not trying to be overpowering and dominant and the one that's right all the time. And it really acts as more of a magnet than it does a repelling kind of way.
Oh my God, you're so like talking my language. So, right. I have a neuroscience background and I'm always thinking about what's motivating people and I'm thinking about thinking. And one of the things that is, um, really clear to me when you look at the human operating system of how we operate as beings is that there is this whole undercurrent of emotions way beyond cognitive, like
Yeah.
what you say and what you do, that like as human beings, like we have all these receptors all over us and all these different intelligences, like intuitive, instinctual,
Mhm.
emotional, beyond the cognitive, that actually figure out, can we trust somebody or not,
Yeah.
that have nothing to do with what the words anybody says or
Yeah.
the slides are on the PowerPoint. So I love that you bring that up, because it's interesting. We're at a time now where for a long time, at least since I've gotten in the workforce, it's kind of been like looking at those human skills, those are soft skills, and
Mhm.
we want to just pretend like they're not there. But AI is amplifying all of the dysfunction. Right? And
Yes.
so, as my last question to you, I want you to think about, what advice would you give to listeners, leaders who are, trying to embrace all of the changes that are happening, but what human skills, what three human skills would you give advice to for people to start working on, just to really stay relevant in the time of change?
Wow. Three skills. Uh, I would say first, embrace learning. Number one, embrace the aspect of learning about new technology and new capabilities. Now, I don't mean that you have to go in and learn the mathematics behind neural networks, or you don't have to learn that
Don't
sort of
do it.
science, but learning how to apply the technology, trying to understand what it is and how you can apply it, will be a great benefit. Okay. Um, Secondly, understanding some of the limitations and recognizing that there are limitations with the technology, and it's about managing those expectations when you understand that. Trying to think that it's going to be the end all be all solution is probably a bit naive. So I think it's important to understand the technology, understand the technological limitations, and then thirdly, I want to go back to what I said at the very beginning, which is revisit your self roots in, the moral, the ethical, and the relational aspect of of yourself and of your company and of your teams, because those are really the foundational things that are going to help you define those boundaries and those guidelines, so that when you do understand the technology and you understand how to apply it, as those applications come, and the suggestions that will come from the application, you may not it may not be as difficult to make a decision about whether we should apply it in that area or not, because of the potential outcome it could have. If the outcome or the unintended outcome starts to encroach upon one of those other foundational uh, lines that you've sort of set, those boundaries, then you can say, okay, this is an area we don't need to go, or this is an area where we can really embrace and push further and push harder.
Yeah, like you're creating that micro moment of choice of like, is this where I want to spend my energy or not? So I
Yeah.
love that advice. Mark, what a pleasure talking with you. I feel like you have such a good sense and sense of really what's going on with AI. Even just your explanations at the end of how I feel like so many leaders are overcomplicating this AI thing. Forget everything you've learned about technology and just start to use it, right? Even if it's to talk to your children better or whatever it might be, right?
Yeah.
Just start using it.
Yeah.
But I want to thank you for being on the show today. If our listeners want to find you, where is a good place for them to reach out to you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to find me. It's linkedin.com/NIN/Mark W. Rigney.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. And as always, please like and subscribe to Wired for Wonder. We appreciate everybody listening. And thanks for being on the show today, Mark.
Lori, thanks so much for having me. I've enjoyed it.